Last time we talked about the beginning of the Constitutional Convention and the introduction of the Virginia Plan on May 29th of 1787. Today we're going to jump into some of the early debates and key moments during the first few days of the convention. A note to help you follow along: at times I will mention an individual by their full name, and times after that I will refer to them as Mr. Last Name, as that's how it reads in my sources. For example, James Madison would be Mr. Madison, and Edmund Randolph as Mr. Randolph. And one last thing, I left out a crucial detail in my last video for the events of May 29th, and that was the adoption of the secrecy rules. The convention had been considering and eventually adopted rules to keep the details of the convention a secret. That nothing spoken of during the convention be printed, published, or communicated otherwise without approval. They believed this would allow delegates to discuss, debate, and change their positions without worry of outside criticisms from the press or public, and this allowed them to promote compromises with one another. Now, on to May 30th. Delegates formed the Committee of the Whole, composed of all the delegates, to review, debate, and modify the present plans, most notably the Virginia Plan, over the next 2 weeks of the convention. The committee's first resolution, Resolution 1, was to establish a federal government of three parts: a supreme legislature, an executive, and judicial branch, which was approved with a 6-1 vote. The delegates of Connecticut voted no, and New York's were divided and not counted. A discussion about how many votes each state would have in the new Congress began. This discussion made no progress, though. James Madison urged that equal vote for each state, like that in the Articles of Confederation, would not prevail. George Reed of Delaware moved to postpone the discussion because the Delaware delegates were instructed to not approve any motions such as Madison's and would have to leave the convention otherwise. The committee settled to postpone the matter of Resolution 2 for the moment. On May 31st, 2 days after the introduction of the Virginia Plan, debates on the legislative branch began. The first matter was Resolution 3, whether to have a bicameral or unicameral legislature. Bicameral meaning 2 houses or branches, and unicameral meaning 1 house or branch. Madison notes that a bicameral legislature was agreed to without debate or resistance, except from Benjamin Franklin, who was partial to a single house legislature. The real challenge would be Resolution 4, the election of the first house by the people rather than the states, which began to show divisions in the members of the convention. Not every member of the convention agreed to let the people have this much power directly in the federal government, while others believed it was necessary. First began Mr. Roger Sherman of Connecticut. Mr. Sherman was a lawyer and judge and the only person to sign all of the key founding documents for the nation. He argued that representatives should be chosen by state legislatures because people lacked the necessary information and were constantly liable to be misled. He was followed in agreement by Mr. Gerry. Eldridge Gerry, delegate from Massachusetts, stated the following: "The evils we experience flow from the excess of democracy. The people do not want virtue, but are the dupes of pretended patriots. In Massachusetts, it had been fully confirmed by experience that they are daily misled into the most baneful measures and opinions by the false reports circulated by designing men, and which no one on the spot can refute." He said he still believed in republicanism, but he had learned to be cautious of a populist spirit. George Mason, a prominent Virginia delegate, argued against these notions and stood firmly for the election of representatives by the people. This branch of the legislature should know and sympathize with every part of their community, that these members should not just be from the different states, but also from different parts of each state, to represent the diverse interests of the people throughout the country. He stated he understood the dangers of being too democratic, but feared also moving too far in the opposite direction. The government needed to work for the rights of every class of people, and that policy should provide for the rights and happiness of those of the lowest classes as much as it does the highest classes of people. James Wilson, prominent delegate from Pennsylvania, followed in agreement with Mr. Mason. He believed strongly that the most numerous branch of the legislature should be drawn from the people. For the nation to have a strong and effective government, it would have to have a strong foundation, which he believed was the popularly elected representatives. No government could survive long without the confidence of the people, especially a republic. He also disagreed with giving the power to choose these representatives to the state governments. The national and state governments should be separated as much as possible, and that the issues with the federal government had resulted from more from officials in state governments than it had from the people themselves. Mr. Madison also agreed with Wilson and Mason. He stated that the election of representatives by the people was essential to a free government. He noted that some of the state legislatures was made up of men not of the people. If the first branch was chosen by these governments and not the people, and the next branch was chosen by the first branch and the executive by both of these branches, then the people would be completely disconnected from the government. The government overall would be more stable and durable if it rested on a solid foundation of the people, rather than just pillars of the various legislatures of the states. Mr. Gerry still did not like the idea of representatives being chosen by the people, but rather that maybe the people could nominate a number of persons and the states could choose from them. Pierce Butler, a delegate from South Carolina, agreed with Mr. Gerry, believing that election of representatives by the people was simply impractical. The committee would ultimately agree to have the first house of the legislature elected by the people, though, with 6 state delegations voting yes, 2 no, and 2 divided. Moving to the 5th resolution, that the second branch of the national legislature should be chosen by the first branch from persons nominated by state legislators. Richard Dobbs Speight, delegate of North Carolina, began by proposing an amendment to the resolution to have the second branch elected by the state legislators directly. Mr. Butler followed up, stating that taking so many powers out of the hands of the states as was proposed tended to destroy all that balance and security of interest among the states, which it was necessary to preserve, and called Mr. Randolph, the mover of the propositions, to explain the extent of his ideas, and particularly the number of members he meant to assign to this second branch. Randolph defended his proposals as general ideas for a course of action, not detailed plans. But he was of the opinion himself that it should be much smaller than the first to avoid the issues you have with larger assemblies of people. He believed the goal was to provide a cure to the current troubles the United States faced. The origins of these troubles, he believed, were chaos and follies of democracy. That a smaller, more efficient Senate would create a necessary check in the government against those forces. Rufus King, delegate from Massachusetts, spoke up to the whole committee that Mr. Speight's idea was impractical unless that branch also be very numerous, or the idea of proportional representation among the states be meaningless. Mr. Speight withdrew his amendment following these remarks. James Wilson opposed both ideas and believed that for the second branch to be independent of other government bodies, it must be elected by the people as well. He further added that states should be grouped together into districts of one or more states, and each district elected a number of senators similar to that as New York's Senate. Mr. Madison believed that this idea would destroy influence of the smaller states, with Mr. Sherman favoring the election of one member per state, chosen by the state legislature. Charles Pinckney, delegate from South Carolina, moved to end all talk of the nomination by state legislators, with all delegations from the states voting no, except for Delaware, which was divided. The whole question for electing the second branch by the first branch from state nominations was also voted down in a 3-7 vote. Madison was of the opinion that this left a chasm in his plans for a new government. Moving on to their 6th resolution to figure out how the national legislature would legislate was taken into discussion. Everyone agreed that both branches of the legislature could create new laws, and that they have all the powers of the current Congress. The real issue was the proposition for having legislative power in all cases in which the state legislators were individually incompetent. Mr. Pinckney, along with John Rutledge, another delegate from South Carolina, objected to the vagueness of the term incompetent and preferred a defined list of powers and situations that this applied to. Mr. Butler again repeated his fears. The states were losing too much power under these changes. Mr. Randolph was also resistant to these measures of interference in state jurisdictions. Mr. Madison spoke up, saying he had brought with him into the convention a strong bias in favor of an enumeration and definition of the powers necessary to be exercised by the national legislature, but he had also brought doubts concerning its practicability. His wishes remained unaltered, but his doubts had become stronger. What his opinion might ultimately be, he could not yet tell. But he should shrink from nothing which should be found essential to such a form of government as would provide for the safety, liberty, and happiness of the community. The committee agreed in a 9-1 vote to allow the legislature power in cases that individual states were incompetent. They also agreed to give the national legislature veto power over state laws without debate. The only matter left to resolve was the last clause of Resolution 6, authorizing the exertion of force of the whole Union against a delinquent state, and Mr. Madison spoke again. The more he reflected on the use of force, the more he doubted the practicability, the justice, and the efficacy of it when it applied to people collectively and not individually. A union of the states containing such ingredients seemed to provide for its own destruction. The use of force against the state would look more like a declaration of war than an infliction of punishment, and it would probably be considered by the party attacked as a dissolution of all previous compacts by which it might be bound. He hoped that such a system would be framed as might render this resource unnecessary, and moved that the clause be postponed. This motion was agreed to, and the committee rose to adjourn for the day. Please don't forget to like and share the video. Give me a follow or subscribe, and tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'm the Holler Scholar. God bless. Stay vigilant.